1600. For decades, Portuguese Catholics have been trading with Japan. They hide its location from their sworn enemies, European Protestants. From the very first shots, we see a storm-beaten schooner with scraps of sail hanging down. The crew is desperate to find Japan. Food on board ran out a few days ago, and the water ran out today. The captain no longer believes in the success of the venture and prepares for the worst. Just then, one of the sailors casts a plumb line to measure the depth. Covered in grease, it emerges from the water covered in white sand. It is a sign of land nearby. The pilot runs to the captain with the good news, but he is in no hurry to rejoice. Of the 5 ships, only one remains afloat, with a handful of dying survivors on board. He is sure that the sailor is wishful thinking and that the end is near. The somber pilot leaves the captain's cabin, and a moment later, he hears the sound of a gunshot behind him. The captain has bid farewell to this life. Next, we are shown the Japanese coast. The schooner did reach its destination, but no joyous shouts were heard. A squad of Japanese climb aboard the ship. They go down into the hold and see the crew. The half-dead sailors don't react to anything. Only the pilot jumps out of his seat, but the 5 men twist him around, and he only calms down when he loses consciousness. Meanwhile, Lord Toranaga has appeared at the call of the Council of Regents. The council is headed by Lord Ishido. He accuses him of accumulating power through some marriages. This allowed him to expand his territory many times over. The main accusation is that the mother of the heir is in Toranaga's territory. The regents suspect that she is being held hostage. Therefore, the lord is given 7 days to return her to Osaka, otherwise he will be stripped of his position as regent. Toranaga remains a prisoner in the castle. He knows that as soon as the heir's mother arrives in Osaka, he and his men will be immediately executed. Nevertheless, he sends a man to inspect the barbarians' ship they found. But the lord wasn't the only one interested in the ship. Lord Yabushige has also appeared on shore. He heads straight for the pit with the captured sailors. The 12 captives don't know what to expect. When the order is given for everyone to go up, Pilot John wants to go up alone. He is the only one who speaks Portuguese, so he can tell them that they are just ordinary lost merchants. However, they are not willing to be nice to them. Some Japanese with swords come down to attack the sluggish barbarians. A fight breaks out. A Japanese man is taken hostage and John goes upstairs. They immediately grab him and start beating him. Through a local villager who speaks some Portuguese, John is told to be submissive, but the man refuses. When the Japanese refuse to release him, he asks the old man to translate that he is ready to piss on all the inhabitants of this country for such hospitality. The Japanese man interrogating him immediately beats John and then urinates on him while he is being held. It turns out that he speaks excellent Portuguese himself, so he understood everything without an interpreter. John is then escorted through the village. The villagers wonder who the man is, why he is being held, and if he is a Christian. The samurai doesn't answer, but orders everyone to disperse. An old man stops in front of John and makes the sign of the cross. After a second, his head separates from his body, and the escort returns his sword to its sheath, and everyone moves on. Soon their small procession arrives at Yabushige's house. He calls for a Portuguese priest to translate. The priest sees the Protestant in front of him. He won't translate John's words, but taunts his master that the man before them is a dastardly pirate who deserves to die. John understands the intent of the Portuguese. In a last attempt, he rushed at the priest, snatched the rosary from him, and trampled it with his feet. He shows the Japanese that he is neither Catholic nor Portuguese, and in doing so, he makes Yabushige curious. The Japanese order the prisoner to be washed, but someone else has to be executed. Meanwhile, Toranaga talks with the young heir. The boy was called to a calligraphy lesson, and the lord stayed with the lady who is taking care of the heir until his mother returns. She begins a conversation about the council and Ishido, assuming that the latter has promised Toranaga's domain to the regents. The lady realizes that he will soon execute Toranaga and later the regents themselves, taking all the lands for himself. And after that, he'll probably get rid of the heir. Toranaga assures her that he will protect the boy until he dies. The lady insists that the dark times are near, that Toranaga should become a shogun as his family's history dictates, but the lord believes that a shogun, a warlord, is a relic of a savage past. Meanwhile, in Yabushige's domain, everything is ready for execution. While the pilot is cleaned up and made to look good, another sailor is boiled alive in a vat of boiling water. In the morning, Yabushige is ready to go home. He is glad that the ship is now his property, because there is no need to tell his master Toranaga about it. The master will be killed soon anyway, and in a future war, everyone will have to reckon with the owner of the ship and his weapons. However, Toranaga's man Hiromatsu reaches the shore and informs Yabushige Yabushige that the Lord has confiscated the ship, the crew, the weapons, and the silver and gold found on board. Yabushige is forced to comply. Hiramatsu returns to his master in Osaka. He decides to take John and Yabushige with him. A local Spaniard, Rodriguez, vouches for the sailor and promises to keep an eye on him. After that, they board the boat and set off for Osaka. During the night, a storm comes up. Rodriguez takes the helm, while the Japanese row, but experience is lacking, and John shouts for the bow of the ship to be turned into the wave. The Spaniard unties his hands and tells him to go down into the hold to push the rowers. Yabushige sees the prisoner being released and rushes into the hold to get him, but sees him giving orders to everyone. The Japanese man realizes that John is an experienced pilot. Swallowing his pride, he begins to row with the rest of the oarsmen as the Englishman asks. That's when Rodriguez is swept away by a wave. John manages to throw him an oar, just something to keep him from drowning. He himself rushes to the helm in his place. They manage to survive the storm. Already on shore, he wants to go along the shore in search of Rodriguez. Hiramatsu is against it, but Yabushige, who is grateful to the sailor for saving their lives, defends his wish. He takes some of his men with him, and together with John, they set out to find Rodriguez. They find Rodriguez on the rocks below, but John is not allowed to go down to him. Rodriguez, with his experience as a pilot, is desperately needed alive. Then John gives the rope to Yabushige, because the Lord cannot refuse in front of his men. He goes down to the Spaniard, but the rope breaks and the Japanese falls the last few meters onto the rocks. He survives, but a wave immediately washes him away. While his men run to the ship for more rope, Yabushige fights for his life. John sees that the Japanese is without strength, so he draws his sword and is about to leave this world, but a new rope is thrown from above and pulls the Lord out. Startled by what he sees, John bows to him. Back on the ship, Rodriguez shows John the ship's journals. He knows that John and his crew specifically searched for Japan and burned all reachable settlements, so when he arrives in Osaka, he will give these records to the Portuguese. After a while, the voyage comes to an end, and John is brought to Toranaga. The sailor bows to the regent, intending to survive in this land at all costs. Osaka, 1 year ago. The Lord of Japan, Taiko, is on his deathbed. He summons Toranaga and asks him to protect his son and heir. Taiko creates the Council of Regents, of which Toranaga is to become the 5th regent. The council is to rule until the heir turns 16. Toranaga realizes that he is signing his own death warrant. As the heir's protector, he will gather all his enemies around him, but he cannot argue, so he agrees. Rodriguez keeps his word and gives the journal to the Portuguese. At first, it was decided to show the papers to the Japanese, who would surely hang the pilot. However, the opinion was voiced that Toranaga is pedantic and would therefore want to translate the entire journal, and there, as it became clear to all, were unflattering records of the atrocities committed by the Portuguese themselves. One of the missionaries goes to the castle where Toranaga is being held to translate the Englishman's speech to him. He was given to understand that the translation should make the sailor no longer a problem. The Portuguese interpreter doesn't yet know that Toranaga has invited Mariko to the meeting. The girl is the daughter of his old friend and the wife of Hiramatsu's son. She also speaks Portuguese, so she sits next to them. During the conversation, John only manages to explain who he is, where he comes from, and why his country is at war with Portugal. He explains that he is not a pirate, but just then Ishido, the head of the Council of Regents, arrives. He is surprised to see Toranaga spending his last days with the barbarian. In response, Toranaga orders John to be sent to prison. In the evening at Mariko's house, her husband is extremely unhappy that his wife has left the house. However, his father, who has just entered, interrupts his angry remarks. He announces that Lord Toranaga would like to see Mariko again. Her husband didn't dare to contradict Hiramatsu. At the meeting, Toranaga asked how accurate the Portuguese's translation was today. Mariko confirmed that the Portuguese was honest, but she would be wary of the Englishman. Hiramatsu doesn't understand the connection between the pirate and Toranaga's dismissal from the regency, and lets the clever Mariko answer for him. The pirate is of great concern to the Portuguese, which means that they will soon ask the 2 Christian regents of the council to execute the pirate. This would cause dissension within the council, and the regents would be unable to vote unanimously to remove Toranaga as regent, which would save his life. In prison, John meets a Protestant priest. The pilot explains that there has been a mistake. He's Toranaga's guest, not a prisoner, and he promised to let him sail. The priest tells John how things really are for him in Osaka, that Toranaga only has a few days left. So if he calls John his ally, the sailor will definitely not leave Japan alive. The day has come when the council must unanimously vote for Toranaga's death. But first, the Catholic regents ask Ishido to execute the heretic. As Toranaga had expected, the regents disagree. Ishido is unwilling to delay the vote against Toranaga, and the Catholic regents argue that the heretic should be executed first. As a result, the vote fails. John continues to listen to the priest's revelations. He learns that Taiko wanted to end trade with Portugal, but the church fomented a rebellion rebellion by supplying weapons from a secret base in Macau. John is astonished. He had been to Macau and had seen hundreds of armed Japanese Catholics there, and the local rulers don't know about it? This information might save his life. The Portuguese priest visits the castle where Toranaga is being held. When he sees Mariko praying, he says he is very happy that his best student is taking the time to pray. He also expresses his surprise at seeing her in a meeting with a heretic yesterday. The priest tells Mariko that he has seen the barbarian's papers and knows that he is guilty of the worst. Ishido, the regent of the council, comes to Yabushige's house and asks him to tell him about the barbarian he brought to Osaka. He wants to understand why the foreigner is needed by Toranaga. Yabushige suggests that the barbarian is needed to split the council. He also suggests that after Toranaga's death, Ishido will be opposed by the Christian regents. Ishido agrees that he will lose this opposition. Yabushige then offers himself as a vassal who can keep the barbarian in check, meaning that Ishido might not lose. The regent likes Yabushige's words, but he's already been forced to agree to the barbarian's execution. But even for that, Yabushige has a plan. It is time for John's execution. He is blindfolded and taken to the forest. But robbers attack the guards and kill them all. It is Yabushige who hired them to free the sailor. After the rescue, Yabushige orders his men to get rid of the bandits themselves. Within a minute, all are killed, and John thanks the liberator. The pilot is brought to Toranaga and the young heir. Mariko sits nearby to translate. John explains to her that he is not a Catholic, and Toranaga apologizes for the prison. With Mariko's help, John explains to Toranaga the true aims of the Portuguese in Japan. He tells him that they, along with the Spaniards, have divided the uncharted lands among themselves. And Japan belongs to the Portuguese. They want to replace all the local rulers with their viceroys. John also talks about the Catholic base in Macau, and the Japanese mercenaries in that fortress, and the weapons being supplied there to support the rebellion. Lord Toranaga instructs the pilot to spend the night in the castle, as there are many bandits outside its walls. The Portuguese priest asks Toranaga to sign permission for the black ship to leave the harbor. It is a Portuguese ship that will be leaving to take another shipment of treasure back to Portugal, but Toranaga is unwilling to sign. He tells the priest what he knows about the secret Portuguese military bases, and he wants to know more about them before taking any further steps. The Catholic Church is furious, and the barbarian begins to scuttle their plans. But a Christian regent is called in to solve the problem. At night, an assassin appears at the castle. A woman with a knife begins to kill anyone who gets in her way. This includes both concubines and guards. John hears screams that an assassin has entered the castle and that Lord Toranaga must be guarded. John rushes over to help, but in the meantime, Toranaga has put his clothes under his blanket as if he were covered and asleep, while he stands in the corner, drawing his sword and waiting for his guest. It didn't take long for the assassin to appear. Running into the room, she was about to stab the figure under the blanket, but Toranaga wounded her with his sword. The assassin rushed to attack with her last ounce of strength, but at that moment, John blocked her path. He defended Toranaga, though he took a slash wound to his arm. Together with the Lord, they finished off the assassin. When everyone has surrounded the body, Toranaga says that he put the barbarian in his chambers and took his place. So the assassin didn't come for him, but for the barbarian. And it was not Ishido who sent her, but the regents. After the attack, Toranaga summons Yabushige to him. Yabushige is prepared for any outcome of the meeting, so he has made a will in advance. When he sees Toranaga, he hands over his sword. The first question was, did he know anything about the Amida Tong clan? They are assassins. Toranaga wonders how much Yabushige would pay them for his head. The man realizes that the regent is interested for a reason. He suspects him, and now Yabushige's life hangs in the balance. Toranaga also tells him that he knows about Ishido's visit. What was his proposal? Yabushige realizes that only the truth must be told. He tells him that he was offered Toranaga's seat on the Council of Regents, but he has no interest in it. He needs a small province to expand his holdings, but also, he needs a head on his shoulders to rule. Toranaga realizes that Yabushige didn't hire the assassin because the attack was on the pilot, not him. Therefore, he has a task: hide the sailor and Lady Kiri in his possession, and then he will get his province. And that very morning, the captain of a black ship and a Portuguese priest arrive in town with bad news. Toranaga won't let the ship go, but the captain doesn't care. He has to deliver the treasure to Macau, so he declares that he will sail today. He doesn't care what happens next, but the damned pilot hurts them more and more. So waiting it out isn't an option. Meanwhile, John is being treated for a wound on his arm after being attacked. Mariko is nearby and translates the conversation with the healer. A Japanese man enters and says that the sailor will be taken elsewhere today. A group of Toranaga's warriors led by Yabushige has already gathered in the courtyard. The Lord's first concubine, Lady Kiri, sits in a handcart. John has been told to stay close to him. and remain visible at all times. Yabushige is not happy. They should have left long ago. But then a signal sounds that Ishido's troops are at the gate. The regent is extremely annoyed that the pilot and Lady Kiri are leaving his castle. The guards inspect the handcarts. After making sure that Lady Kiri is definitely there, the chief sets out his warriors to escort the procession to the port. No assurances from Yabushige that they would make it on their own affect his decision. Only Mariko and John notice that Lady Kiri has quietly left her handcart after the inspection, and that Lord Toranaga has taken her place. The escort moves on. Before leaving the city, they were stopped by guards again. By order of Ishido, they have to inspect all travelers. John realizes that just a little more and Lord Toranaga's cunning will be revealed. When the handcart is a few steps away and the sailor sees that no one is stopping the guard, he rushes towards him. Pilot plays the offended man who is forced to watch a man peeking into a woman's carriage. The play was a success. They were all let out of the gate. Night found the troops in the woods. From the top of the hill, burning arrows flew at the people. The first victims appeared. Several flaming arrows hit the handcart and Toranaga had to get out. His son saw him, as did the commander of Ishido's men. Toranaga realizes that they attack pilots again. Meanwhile, the commander of Ishido's men sends a messenger with news of Toranaga's escape. The only chance to escape is to head for the harbor. Everyone runs to the harbor, leaving only a few samurai to hold off the enemies. On the shore, the refugees are loaded into boats and set sail, with hundreds of pursuers already on their trail. As they swim away from the shore, everyone looks and sees Mariko's husband, Buntaro, the brave samurai. This is one of the samurai left behind to protect his master's retreat. His military skill allows him to cut down the enemy left and right. Retreating to the water itself, he makes sure that Toranaga is already far from the shore. His mission is accomplished. He bows to his master and accepts Toranaga's bow in return. The warrior then raises his sword and attacks the hordes of enemies. Looking out from the boat, Mariko realizes that she is about to lose her husband. When they reach their galley, everyone sees a huge number of boats. The pirates have blocked the exit of the harbor and are already waiting for Toranaga. John has a bold idea: sail up to the Portuguese's black ship and negotiate with them. Pirate boats are no match for a huge schooner. Once on board, the captain agreed for a fee. Portuguese priests were also on board. Toranaga promises them that he will allow a Christian church to be built in his town. But in return, they'll have to win over 2 Christian regents who are currently loyal to Ishido. The priests pretend to agree. But the captain has another condition. The pilot must stay in Osaka. Captain gives Toranaga John's ship's logs, which prove that he is a pirate, so Toranaga agrees. John watches the black ship sail away and realizes that his life is pretty much over now. Ishido watches from the shore. John decides to fight to the end. He stays on the galley and looks at the crew and their captain. The captain is his buddy, so the pilot asks him to beat the drums and sail after the black ship. He almost catches up to the schooner and keeps pace with it, preparing to crash into the pirates' rows. No one on the black ship expected such audacity from a sailor. The schooner smashes into the boats, gradually crowding John's galley. The black ship has created a gap in the pirate ambush, into which John's galley has slipped, but there's no time to celebrate. The schooner's captain didn't just help the sailor by turning left. Yes, he covered the galley with his hull, but the plan was different, to push the galley into the reefs. But the Spaniard remembers that John saved him, so he lets the galleys go, thus paying off his personal debt. Both ships have left the harbor, and Toranaga decides to return to his galley. At that time, Hiromatsu visits the Council of Regents. He brought the regents an order from Toranaga, in which he voluntarily resigns from his position as regent. The remaining regents now have 4 votes each, which does not give them the right to vote on issues, as only 5 regents can make decisions. And on the galley, Toranaga thanks John for his help in getting out of Osaka. He says he has John's journals, and piracy is punishable by death, but they will take a long time to translate. John has to raise a regiment and train them in foreign tactics. And from that moment on, John is no longer a barbarian. Toranaga declares him his Hatamoto, a high-ranking samurai. In the fishing village of Yabushige, where Toranaga and John plan to seek refuge, the cold has already set in. The viceroy of the village, Yabushige's nephew, receives a letter about the imminent arrival of the guests. So he tells all the villagers to prepare for the big meeting. Toranaga orders that John, as Hatamoto, be provided with a concubine. A widow who has recently lost her child and husband sails with them on the galley. Mariko tells her that Toranaga wants her to be the pilot's concubine. The girl feels insulted, but it is impossible to defy the lord, so she agrees to serve the new Hatamoto for 6 months. The galley reaches the village. The nephew has done his best, and the entire Yabushige army greets the guests on the shore. Hundreds of soldiers bow their heads in respect. After Toranaga reviews the troops, he leaves on business. Left ashore, John tries to find his crew, but learns that they have recently been transferred to another town. The pilot wants to board his ship, which remains moored off the coast of the village, but the viceroy does not allow it. John does not understand. He has agreed with Toranaga that the ship and crew are his. However, Mariko, who has approached the man, makes it clear that everything belongs to Toranaga, so nothing can be done without his permission. Mariko shows John his new home, his servants, and introduces him to his concubine. She reminds the man that he has agreed to train people and that it will take 6 months. John is outraged. While Toranaga is away, Yabushige has the guns and cannons from the barbarian ship at his disposal. If the regents find a fifth, they will send Toranaga into retirement. In that case, the weapon will remain in Toranaga's possession. He can then present it to Ishido as a gift. Meanwhile, John tries to get his concubine to stop following him around. Mariko says that a concubine cannot go to bed while her master is awake. In the morning, the regiment leaves for training. The viceroy follows John and tries to force him to give up his pistols. John stubbornly refuses. He points both pistols at the guest. Mariko tells him to come to his senses, but John can't forget his first encounter with the viceroy, who bullied him in the pit. The concubine also asks him to hand over the weapons, but not to anyone else, but to her for safekeeping. She will guard them with her own life. John has no choice but to obey. When the viceroy sees the barbarian handing the weapon to his concubine, he insists that she give it to him, but the girl points a pistol at him and tells him to leave the court. John looks at the girl with admiration and the viceroy leaves the court. In the field, Yabushige demands that John talk about foreign battle tactics. Mariko is willing to translate, but John keeps telling her that he is a sailor and has not participated in land wars. He realizes that his whole position could come crashing down at once. After some thought, he offers to show Yabushige how to fight at sea, as land warfare is nothing but flowers in comparison. John cites the castle at Osaka as an example and offers to demonstrate. The Japanese set up ground targets. Yabushige is skeptical. He is certain that it is impossible to hit such distant targets with a cannon. As a result, all the targets are defeated, and Yabushige and his men are shocked. Over time, John learns Japanese with Mariko. He has military training in the mornings. One night, Mariko reads John's ship logs. She learns of his crimes against the Portuguese. After seeing John the next day, she declares that Toranaga will not go with him against his enemies. During another training, news arrives that Ishido's men have broken through the post and are approaching the village. Yabushige meets with the commander of the approaching troops. He realizes that Ishido believes that his ally betrayed him by leaving Osaka with Toranaga. Yabushige persuades commander to stay until tomorrow morning to watch the morning firing. He assures that his weapons are the only thing that will help Ishido. The commander agrees. Yabushige explains to Toranaga's son that the council summoned him, but he refused because of his total loyalty to Lord Toranaga. In the evening, John dines at his home with his concubine and Mariko. He apologizes to his concubine for his manners and gives her a pistol. It's the most precious thing he has. In return, the girl gives him the family swords that belong to her father. She cannot serve a man without a sword, so John is forced to accept such an expensive gift. Meanwhile, the viceroy talks to Toranaga's son. He assures the boy that if they show their military tactics to Ishido's man, it will inevitably lead to future defeat. The nephew is counting on Toranaga's son to solve the problem, and his calculations have not failed. To show his importance, Toranaga's son promises to solve the problem. Late in the evening, John goes to the cave to bathe. Mariko finds him there and they talk. Pilot tells the girl about his city, London, how wonderful it is to walk along the Thames and feel freedom. At night, Mariko wakes John up and makes love to him. In the morning, he discovers that it wasn't an act of passion. Mariko had talked to her concubine the day before, and the girls decided to give Hatamoto such a gift. The morning has come, targets have been set, the commander of Ishido's troops stands ready to watch. But then Toranaga's son draws his sword and tells him that his very presence in this village is an insult to his father's honor. He gives the order, and the cannons fire from the side of the targets, hitting both the commander and his men. Within a minute, all that remains of the troop is a bloody mess. Everyone is shocked by such an act. Mariko is stunned and realizes that a war has broken out. The last remains of Ishido's men are piled into a cart. An army of thousands, led by Toranaga and Mariko's surviving husband, Buntaro Toda, marches on the village. Meanwhile, the Council of Regents unanimously decides to remove Toranaga from power, but the council is now incomplete. It is time to choose a fifth regent. Ishido suggests the candidacy of Dano, a cousin of one of the regents. Toranaga orders that Mariko be left in John's house, and that her husband be placed with her. This way, Mariko can serve two people at once. Toranaga's son approaches his father and talks about his foolish decision to kill Ishido's men. Toranaga immediately realizes that the boy is being manipulated. He even finds out who it was, Yabushige's nephew. Until his son learns how to avoid such traps, his father removes him from command. John is presented with a pheasant that Toranaga has caught at a falconry. Hatamoto is overjoyed and hangs the bird in the courtyard, telling all the household not to touch it for a few days, or they will die. The concubine tries to reason with him that the bird will rot in the meantime, but that's all John wants. Later, the concubine meets Lord Toda, Mariko's husband. The man is very unhappy about having to live under the same roof with a barbarian. A short time later, Toranaga talks to Yabushige and accuses him of inciting his son. To avoid being accused, Yabushige rats out his nephew. He says that he had been drinking with Toranaga's son the day before, and he put into his head the idea of killing Ishido's men. Yabushige is ready to punish a rebellious nephew, but Toranaga is satisfied. Now Ishido is offended and will attack on his own. Otherwise, Toranaga would have to besiege his castle, which would inevitably lead to his defeat. He gives the young man the position of artillery commander. Evening comes. It's time for dinner. Everyone in John's house gathers around the table. Mariko's husband speaks disparagingly of John. His wife tries to translate so as not to offend anyone. At the table, the men begin to compete in literally everything. John swaps the small sake shot glass for a large bowl. Toda does the same. Finally, both men get quite drunk. When it comes to archery, Toda shoots an arrow a millimeter from Mariko's face. John says it's not business to treat his wife like that. Toda then forces Mariko to reveal her vile lineage. It turns out that her father served the former ruler of Japan, who was famous for his cruelty. One day, for the sake of the country, Mariko's father kills the ruler. As punishment, he has to kill all his family members and then himself. Mariko is married, so she is forced to obey her husband, who orders her to live. At night, John hears Toda beating his wife. He rushes to her defense, but the man is already gone, leaving the battered woman alone in the room. John runs out into the yard after him, and the men stand facing each other. Toda bows to John and apologizes for drunkenly disturbing the harmony of his house. The next morning, John inquires about Mariko's well-being. Mariko claims that it was her own fault, and that from now on, she will only do her job, just translate and nothing more. Back home, he faces grief. The gardener threw out a rotten pheasant, and the others killed him for it. After all, Master John said not to touch it on pain of death. The pilot is in shock. He doesn't understand how a man could be killed for such a thing. John goes to Toranaga. He reminds him that he trained the regiment. Now it's Toranaga's turn to fulfill his part of the deal, give John the ship and crew so they can all leave Japan. Seconds later, a powerful earthquake begins. Toranaga falls into the hole. His son and John jump in to save the Lord. Pilot finds Toranaga, digs the man out, and brings him to consciousness. However, the Japanese loses his swords, which is unacceptable. John gives Toranaga his sword. The earthquake continues, and everyone can see that the army in the valley has been swallowed by the land. Trouble comes to the village. John sees great destruction and loss of life. He runs to his house for his faithful concubine and mistress of his house. She is wounded but alive. All the while, Yabushige is looking for a spy who reports to Toranaga about everything that is going on in the village. The real spy avoids suspicion by showing recently deceased gardener. The next night, the queen, the mother of the heir, arrives at Ishido's castle. She knows that Toranaga has outmaneuvered the Council of Regents and paralyzed its work. Ishido's assurances that he will restore the council have no effect on the queen. She declares to the stunned head of the regents that the council will obey her from this moment on. Azuchi Castle, 22 years ago. A little girl, a future queen, is introduced by her father to the daughter of his vassal, Mariko. The girls are friends. They grow up, live and train together. After Mariko grows up, she marries Toda. It is a marriage of convenience that strengthens the alliance between her father and the Toda clan. 22 years later, Toranaga makes a speech in honor of the dead. He also announces to everyone that John has saved his life for the second time. The Lord gives him the title of Hatamoto, high-ranking samurai. He is now commander of the fleet and the cannon regiment. Toranaga then gives John a sword. We see that Yabushige and his nephew are not happy about the appointment. Toranaga receives Toda. Man apologizes for insulting the Hatamoto's house, but he cannot act calm in front of his wife. Mariko has been cold to him all her life, but she behaves very differently in Hatamoto's company. Toranaga orders a samurai to leave his wife for 7 days. John also comes to see Toranaga. He asks again for his ship back and to be allowed to fight the Portuguese. Toranaga refuses and John leaves. Toranaga asks Mariko to arrange for John to spend the night in a tea house with the best girl so that the commander can calm his mind. At that time, Ishido took the Catholic regents and their families hostage to force the council to elect a fifth regent and vote against Toranaga. Hiramatsu manages to leave the castle to warn the Lord. The Portuguese are worried. They are sure that this is all coming from the queen. They realize that they must seek an alliance with Toranaga or they will be in trouble. In the evening, there's a play at Ishido's castle. After the performance, Ishido and the queen meet with the actor. He had served under Taiko when the queen was a young girl. Ishido suggests that the actor join the council and become the fifth regent. Afterwards, he will have to vote for the death of Toranaga because he is plotting against the heir. In the morning, Hiramatsu arrives at the village. He informs Toranaga that all of Osaka now belongs to Ishido. Hiramatsu insists that it's time for Crimson Sky. This is the plan, to strike Ishido's castle with a mighty blow. Then the council will be overthrown, and Toranaga will become the sole regent, the shogun. Toranaga, however, does not like this plan. He never wanted to be shogun. He asks his men to come up with another plan that does not involve imminent death. In the evening, Mariko makes arrangements with the tea house girl. At night, she takes John there. They are greeted by a beautiful Japanese woman. She is very intelligent and interesting. However, Mariko warns John to be careful. They are being watched. Later, she invites John into a private room with her. Mariko translates everything and leaves, and John follows the girl. However, you can see that both Mariko and the sailor would like to stay together, preferably without witnesses. After that night, John thanks the girl, and Mariko comes to Toranaga to report. Toranaga asks her if she remembers her childhood when she was friends with the future queen. Can Mariko guess what could have happened to a woman who became so violent and belligerent against her? Mariko doesn't know. Toranaga tells the girl about her father's opinion that his daughter was destined for a great future. Mariko objects that her father could have found a better husband for a good future, to which Toranaga admits that this marriage was her father's plan. It was the marriage that saved her life at that time. Ishido introduces a fifth regent to the council. Toranaga's execution is on the agenda. The vote must be unanimous. However, one of the regents votes against it. That same evening, still in the same castle of Ishido, the queen tells why she hates Toranaga so much. She believes her father was killed by Mariko's father, but it was Toranaga who planned the murder. The next morning, the regent, who refused to vote, tries to hide with his family and secretly leaves Osaka. But Ishido and his samurais ride out to meet him in the forest. His men kill the whole family. In the morning, Toranaga calls his men together. He explains that Ishido will soon control the entire council, which means that he will soon be accused of plotting against the heir. He will be removed from office and executed. Not wanting to wait for that, Toranaga announces Crimson Sky. That means it's time to strike first. His army supports him. 46 years ago, young Toranaga gains his first victory on the battlefield. The captured commander speaks words of respect to the victor. He then kneels before the boy and bears his dagger. He asks Toranaga to help him perform the ritual, seppuku. Toranaga assists him with great pleasure. And today, Toranaga and his men stand on the forest road, hoping that his cousin Saiki will join his army. He has appeared and is ready to support Toranaga. But first he wants to visit the local hot springs. Later, John comes to see the Lord. He wonders if Crimson Sky implies his involvement as fleet commander, but Toranaga hasn't decided anything yet. Mariko translates the answer and also advises not to proceed. But John asks again. He demands an explanation. Why is he given titles and land but ignored when it comes to battle? Toranaga doesn't answer this time either, and Mariko really begs the sailor to stop. John listens to her and stops. Meanwhile, Yabushige's nephew visits the tea house to meet a girl he likes. She was the one who served the pilot last time, but the owner says the girl is busy. Lord Toranaga bought her services a week in advance. That same morning, Hiramatsu visits John's concubine. He brings her the ashes of her husband and child. In the evening, Toranaga and his brother have dinner and reminisce about the past. Brother is eager to find out what the great Toranaga is willing to offer for his army. He begins to be disrespectful and later moves on to outright insults. Eventually, Toranaga's brother admits that he received a better offer earlier. People from the village report that his brother's army has blocked all the roads and won't let anyone out of the village. Saiki presents a document stating that he has been chosen as the fifth regent, and that Toranaga has removed from office and is to appear before the council in Osaka. Saiki then turns to his nephew, with whom he had been joking with a moment ago, and holds a document ordering him to take responsibility for the deaths of Ishido's men and to commit a seppuku. Toranaga shouts at his son not to touch the paper. Toranaga says he will think about it and give an answer tomorrow. John asks Mariko what will happen if Toranaga goes to Osaka. She explains that after Toranaga is executed, all of his men will be forced to bow down before Ishido. Half of the men will commit seppuku by remaining loyal to their lord. John tells her that his ship is in the harbor. Yabushige's men can help repair it. Then he can try to get out of the harbor and Saiki visits Yabushige. He informs him that Lord Ishido met his man who confirmed Yabushige's loyalty. Saiki brought Ishido's answer in person. Yabushige sees a box in front of him that contains the head of his man. He realizes that the time when he can play a double game is over. Ishido has not forgiven him and still considers him a traitor. Toranaga, on the other hand, ponders. The situation is hopeless. In the village, he is met by the owner of the tea house. She asks to be let in to share her plan. The woman asks to build them a new quarter, which will be under the protection of the Lord even after his death. On shore, John looks at Ishido's ships. Yabushige approaches him. He complains that as soon as he avoids one death, another awaits him. He is also angry at the sailor for carrying swords that he doesn't know how to use. Yabushige forces Hatamoto to get a sword and teaches him how to use it. On the other side of the village, Toranaga dictates his will. Buntaro, Mariko's husband, comes to see him. He asks for permission to stay with his wife before they all leave, and also asks for permission to behead the barbarian. But Toranaga refuses. The time has come for an official answer. Toranaga tells his brother that he is ready to obey the council and come to Osaka. No one objects except John. He expresses his indignation and leaves the meeting place. And at night, Saiki has fun with the tea house girl. A little later, he hears a noise and sees Toranaga's son appear with his sword at the ready. Saiki tries to escape and runs out into the yard. The boy catches up with him and swings his sword. At the last moment, he slips and falls, hitting the back of his head on a sharp rock. A few minutes later, Toranaga's son dies. The funeral procession, led by Toranaga, moves toward the town. Procession is accompanied by Saiki's army. For 49 days, he will wait for Toranaga until he is done with his son's funeral, then escort him to Osaka. Toranaga returns all of his journals to John. When he goes to Osaka, Hatamoto doesn't have to accompany him. He can leave Japan. His service is over. John's team is here in town. However, John is more concerned about the fate of his translator, but Mariko assures him that her loyalty commands her to go to Osaka with her master. And in Osaka, Ishido already celebrates his victory, but the queen is not yet at peace. In her opinion, the Toranaga threat still remains. Ishido suggests that she strengthen the alliance with their marriage, but the queen takes her time to consider. Evening falls in the village where the funeral procession has arrived. The dead son of Toranaga is honored, and in the morning, the funeral itself begins. Toranaga did not come to the funeral, and the son was cremated without him. Portuguese priest arrives to meet with Toranaga. Padre assures the Lord that his enemy is not all of Osaka, but only Ishido. If Toranaga manages to make an alliance with the queen, Ishido will lose his last string to power, and the heir and Toranaga's army will become a powerful force. But Toranaga does not believe in this outcome. Besides, he knows that his vassals wore armor to his son's funeral, thus protesting his voluntary surrender and acceptance of death. He wants to summon them and get a written promise from them to surrender with him. Toranaga believes that a peaceful surrender is better than a bloody victory. However, he allows the priest to build his church as promised, but with one condition. Padre should go to Osaka and tell them that Toranaga is willing to surrender peacefully. After that, Hiromatsu is sure that the Lord will indeed fight. Meanwhile, Toda wants to make tea for his wife. He reconsiders his attitude towards her, even though he realizes that they'll probably all be dead in Osaka soon. Toda is sure that Mariko still thinks of the barbarian. In protest against Toranaga's surrender, he wants to allow his wife to die the way she has dreamed of all these years. He suggests that they commit seppuku together as husband and wife. Mariko says that she didn't wish for death, but for a life without him, so she will never die with him as he wants. Meanwhile, John is escorted to a sailor's den, because that's where his crew lives. The crew does not accept him. They believe that going to Japan was the pilot's personal ambition. John leaves the place. Hatamoto comes to Yabushige with Mariko for a translation. He believes that Toranaga will die soon. Lord refused to attack Osaka from the sea. Now John wants to go out on his ship under Yabushige's banner. He believes that he will not support the Lord and go with him to his death. But Yabushige refuses. He is certain that Toranaga will not surrender. In any case, as a true vassal, he will remain loyal to his lord. Mariko sees John as a traitor. John says Toranaga has released him from all his obligations, but no words can change her mind about his behavior. The next day, Toranaga meets with his warlords. He informs them that Yabushige will be the first to leave for Osaka tomorrow. He will deliver to Ishido all weapons and a list of names of those who will surrender with Toranaga. Yabushige puts his signature first, followed by his nephew, but the other warlords are against it. They declare that if the master surrenders, they will not follow him. Hiromatsu declares that he would rather kill himself than be defeated. Toranaga replies that he is unyielding. If he wants to die, then let him die, and Hiromatsu commits seppuku. That same night, Toranaga summons Mariko. He asks if John went to see Yabushige. When he hears the positive answer, and that Yabushige refused, Toranaga is sure that Yabushige will change his mind after today's event. Hiromatsu made sure of it. Mariko realizes that it was all the master's plan, that Hiromatsu remained faithful to him as well as to his duty. Osaka must unconditionally believe that Toranaga has surrendered. Now it's up to Mariko. Is she ready to fulfill her mission? Mariko confirms that she is ready, and in Osaka, the queen comes to Ishido. She bows to the regent to let him know that she agrees to an alliance with him. At this time, Yabushige is loading weapons onto John's ship. He has actually changed his mind and decided to make an alliance with the barbarian. A little later, Mariko arrives on the ship with orders from Toranaga to escort Yabushige to Osaka, Sendai Domain. 14 years ago, this is the third time Mariko has been captured. Her husband spares her, but she still seeks death. A Portuguese priest meets her. He prays for her and asks the girl not to be sad. The priest gives her a cross and she accepts it. The ship carrying John, Yabushige, and Mariko arrives in Osaka. Yabushige asks the sailor to stay nearby when Ishido's men meet them. Later, they are taken to Ishido's castle, where all the noble families are held hostage. In the morning, Ishido and the queen receive guests. Yabushige, however, tries to justify himself and presents John as a gift to the head of the council. Ishido declares that the heir has no need for the barbarian. Next, Mariko is introduced to the council. The girl declares that she will leave Osaka tomorrow and return to her master. Furthermore, she will take Toranaga's first concubine and another woman with Toranaga's baby with her. This outrageous behavior leads Ishido to order that the girl not be allowed to leave the castle. Mariko, however, refuses. She is the daughter of a great warlord, not a village girl. With these words, the girl leaves the council. Yabushige is indignant, and he is sure that Mariko will not be allowed to leave the castle in the morning. In the morning, Mariko is about to leave Ishido's castle with Toranaga's concubines. She has a proper guard of strong samurai with her. Escort is stopped on the way out by Ishido's guards, but a single order is enough, and one of the samurai kills the men in front of her. But Mariko's guards are outnumbered. In the next fight, Mariko's samurai die. As a result, Mariko is forced to admit that she is a prisoner. She returns to the castle walls, but since she did not follow her master's orders, she will commit seppuku at sunset. In the Council of Regents, Ishido discusses the incident with the other regents. He finds himself at a disadvantage. If he lets Mariko die, Osaka will be disgraced. If he allows the girl to leave the castle, the other nobles will demand freedom for themselves. Meanwhile, the young heir wants to see John. Ishido's men arrive to escort the sailor. At the meeting, the queen asks if the sailor speaks Japanese well. John asks her to use simple words. Then he will understand her speech. In any case, the queen has called Mariko to translate. The girl realizes that this is an excuse to call her out and warns John against it. The queen asks to tell John how they were friends with Mariko as children, how she supported her in everything and was like a sister to her. But one day Mariko is taken away, and they never see each other again. Now the queen sees a grown woman ready to wreak havoc and destruction. The queen demands to end to these games, but Mariko explains that only the queen can end it all. She protests that she doesn't have that much power. Mariko and John leave the palace. Later, John begs Mariko not to kill herself. Maybe not for prudence, maybe not for God, but maybe for John's sake. Mariko gently takes the sailor's hand, but then releases it and walks away. Meanwhile, Yabushige receives a message from Ishido. The head of the regents agrees to accept Yabushige's loyalty. Evening comes, the time of Mariko's imminent death. The girl confesses to the priest. Realizing that seppuku is a sin, she asks the Catholic regent of the council to help her with the ceremony. He agrees, but when the time comes, the regent doesn't show up. John takes on the role of assistant. He will not allow the girl to destroy her soul by denigrating her. At the very last moment, when the girl has already put the knife to her chest, and John holds his breath with his sword drawn, Ishido comes. He gives Mariko permission to leave the castle. The rest of Toranaga's concubines ask for permission to leave the castle with Mariko. Ishido is forced to let them go as well, as he cannot admit to holding them all hostage. At night, Yabushige begins to kill the guards on the castle wall. After that, the assassins start climbing the ropes. Yabushige opens the gate and lets in more men with swords. Very quietly, the group begins to slaughter all the samurai in the castle. John and Mariko barely fend off their attackers. Mariko is convinced that the assassins have come for her. Together with the concubines and John, she tries to find refuge. Yabushige joins them. They lock themselves in a warehouse with a heavy door, but their pursuers are about to blow the door open. John lacks the strength to barricade it. Mariko realizes that death is upon them. She stands in front of the door and protests with her death against such a daring attack. A moment later, the door explodes. The explosion kills Mariko. John barely regains consciousness after the explosion. He immediately rushes to Mariko, but the girl is dead. In the morning, the nobles leave Ishido's castle. At the Council of Regents, Toranaga's brother delivers a written protest trust from his brother to Ishido. Toranaga is shocked by the death of his favorite vassal, so he leaves the city and goes to war against Osaka. Ishido is not surprised. He doesn't care where Toranaga surrenders, in the castle or on the battlefield. He gives orders for war with the Toranaga. There is a small earthquake. Other regents see this as a bad omen, but Ishido is determined. The order is signed. Afterwards, he comes to Yabushige and thanks him for the job he has done. Yabushige is shocked. He thought Mariko would just be arrested. He remembers that Taiko once wanted to fight Toranaga, but the earthquake stopped him. Taiko took it as a bad omen and made peace with Toranaga. Now there has been another earthquake. Ishido sends Yabushige home to gather an army and wait for the next order. John loses consciousness again after the explosion. He regains consciousness a few days later, when Mariko has already been buried. He is told to pack and be escorted to the harbor. A sailor is given an exit pass. He is met by the priest. He's ready to accompany the pilot to the galley. Yabushige is already there, preparing to sail. Ishido's men accompany John and the priest. The priest tells John that Ishido has declared war on Toranaga. The queen will support him with an heir's army, so Toranaga will die soon. John is sure it's not that simple. Toranaga is not to be underestimated. With the help of a woman, without getting his hands dirty, without declaring war, he made sure that all the hostages were freed. John looks around. There are woods all around. He asks the priest if this is where the ambush is waiting for him. Padre delivers the sailor to the shore. As Mariko had asked the church to spare him before she died, the priest kept his word. He delivers John to Yabushige's galley. Upon reaching the village, John sees the burned remains of his ship. On shore, Yabushige's nephew orders his uncle's swords to be taken away. Toranaga orders his arrest. John wonders who burned his ship. He gets the answer: Christians. Yabushige is brought to Toranaga. He says that Yabushige was seen opening the gates for the assassins. The man is forced to confess to being an accomplice. Toranaga confiscates Yabushige's lands and orders him to commit seppuku before sunset tomorrow. John returns to his home, where he is greeted by his faithful concubine. And Toranaga also meets with his concubines. He holds his baby in his arms and is grateful to the women for keeping his child safe. His first wife gives him a letter. It was given to her by the queen herself before they left Osaka. After reading the letter, Toranaga realizes what kind of fire the faithful Mariko was able to light. John's concubine says that she is leaving John's house as of this morning. Toranaga allows her to end her service and become a nun. John is unable to change the girl's mind, so he thanks her for her service and bids her farewell. In the morning, he goes to see Toranaga. He tells Hatamoto that he is outraged by the burning of his ship and will not rest until he finds those responsible. John asks for a halt to the executions of the villagers, since the ship was burned by Mariko. That's her condition. That's how she saved his life. In exchange for his ship, Toranaga refuses the sailor. He will continue to look for traitors and disloyalty. Then John gives up his sword and asks that he too be punished for being disloyal. He has been using the Japanese since the first day he was in this country. After another refusal, John grabs his sword and begins the ritual. As he is about to plunge the blade into his chest, Toranaga stops him. He stops the executions and also asks John to rebuild his ship and build him a fleet. Meanwhile, Yabushige and Toranaga meet at the cliff. It is time to die. Vassal begs his lord to reveal his plan before he dies. Toranaga is surprised that the man still doesn't understand him. He tells Yabushige that Crimson Sky already operates. In 1 month, all armies will meet on the battlefield. Ishido is confident that the queen will support him with an army. However, in her last letter, she promised not to unleash her army on the battlefield. Ishido will be outnumbered. The other regents will rise up against him, and his time of power will begin, a time of peace when there will be no more wars. Then Toranaga draws his sword and helps Yabushige meet his ancestors. Later, John is on shore trying to pull the remains of the ship ashore with ropes. But the villagers don't have enough strength. Toda, Mariko's husband, approaches them and helps. Lord Toranaga stands on the cliff and watches.